A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So I will start the day with the personality of the day. We'll be talking about Major Suman Gavani, who is chosen for the United Nations Award. So she is a part of the Indian Army, and she was serving as part of the women peacekeeping mission in South Sudan. So she has now been conferred with the prestigious award for her role in addressing gender-related issues. So she had been there the focal point of contact for all the gender-related issues. She was also of the view that there has to be joint military patrols of both women and the men officers that will help in maintaining gender balance. And she was of this opinion to have this joint military patrols irrespective of the extreme hostile and hardship conditions in the field. And she even has visited various mission team sites across South Sudan, and she has helped in integrating the gender perspective into planning and military activity in the mission. So this shows that we have already seen several examples of women who have excelled in the field of business, in the field of sports, as scientists. So there is no end to what women can achieve, and in all the various fields that she can contribute. So there is no such limitation when it comes to a woman, and this can also be cited as an example when the role of women in the armed forces. You may get a question on that, or UPSC has this very favorite topic of asking about women in the essays also. So you can use this as an example to show that women are excelling even in the armed forces. So with this, we'll start with the first topic of the day, which is the agri-tourism. So the other day we were talking about, we discussed in detail the question on reviving the rural economy. So this is one of the important or an innovative measure that the Karnataka government looks to take to revive the rural economy. So agri-tourism means that here agriculture itself is a tourist becomes a tourist attraction. So basically, the farmers will be the stakeholders in this. So people from the urban areas will be attracted to the rural areas when agriculture itself becomes a tourist hotspot. So people from urban areas come, they will get a first-hand experience in farming. They will also see various cultural aspects which are associated with agriculture and rural life, which includes rural sports. So all of these things are to be made a major tourist attraction for people in the urban areas. So many of us urbanites would want to go to a rural area and then at least have a hand on the plow, see how farming is done, and all that. So this itself becomes a tourist attraction. So therefore this will when such tourism activities happen, the money can go to improving the agricultural activities and creating more job opportunities in the rural areas. So this is a unique initiative. This can be mentioned as an example when you talk about the rural economy and how you revive it, given that currently there is this trend of reverse migration. So now we'll go to the next topic, which is regarding racism. So the issue was in United States, there was a death of this African American George Floyd, which happened in Minnesota, where it was seen that the police in Minnesota, a policeman was pressing his knees onto the throat of this black man who was lying on the floor, and he was trying to gasp for breath, but then eventually his body gives up and he dies. So this has led to a lot of protests and violence in the United States streets, where several people have come out in protest for this. So this shows that how even in such developed countries as the United States, there is a lot of discrimination against the blacks, against the minorities, which is still persisting even to this day. Secondly, this also shows how insensitive the police behave and the way they handle the minorities when it comes to any protests on the streets, and how they handle the crowd, or how they deal with the minorities and the blacks. So this is an example which you can quote to show that these unethical practices and behavior of the people to discriminate people on the basis of their color, on the basis of their ethnic origin, etc., continues even to this day, and how it can lead to loss of lives. So then we go to the next topic, which is regarding the India-China relations. So we have already discussed a lot regarding the recent standoff that's happening in the border. So we have seen already that there were several agreements which have been signed in the past, but none of them have been kept in the spirit right now, and therefore there is a lot of standoff and face off between the troops of both the countries. So I'll just be discussing what was new in this article. It spoke about the timeline of agreements. So first there was an agreement in 1993, then there was an agreement in 1996, then 2005 and 2013. So what the article argued was that each of these agreements was a flawed agreement, and that's precisely the reason why we have not been able to solve the boundary issue even to this day. So we will look how these agreements have been flawed. So for instance, if we talk about the 1993 agreement, it says that both the sides, India and the Chinese side, will have to observe the line of actual control and strictly respect that. But however, there was no agreement on where this line of control actually is. But this agreement was talking about respecting the line of control and observing that no activities should be there on either side which will overstep this LAC. But what is LAC, where this line actually lies itself was not agreed upon. Similarly, we had the 1996 agreement, which said that we need to limit the military forces that are deployed along the line of actual control, and activities like air intrusions and all must not be there within 10 kilometers along the LAC. So here it talks about limiting the military presence across LAC, and activities like air intrusions should not even happen 10 kilometers from LAC. But here again, the central focus has been on the LAC without defining where the LAC was. So also this 1996 agreement talks, it says that this agreement is subject to ratification by both the countries, and only when this agreement is ratified by both the countries, it will come into force. But we don't know after 1996 if and when this agreement was ratified, did it ever come to force? None of that is known. So this is the issue with the 1996 agreement. And also in this regard, what the author also says that is, instead of having the LAC, we must basically be having two lines. So this one line up to which the Indians can deploy their forces, and this line up to which the China can deploy their forces. So these two lines will help in having this no man's land in between. So where the two armies will be frozen to their positions along these two lines, and therefore there will be no standoff or face off between the troops. So this is the suggestion of the author of this article, which is definitely a very good suggestion. So like that, when we come to the 2013 agreement also, so the 2013 agreement says that both the sides will work to combat any natural disasters and infectious diseases which may affect or spread from one side to the other. But if you look at the recent face-off, some 70 odd Indian soldiers were injured and they were hospitalized in Ladakh, and they had come face to face. So this could have exposed many of the Indian soldiers to a local Chinese strain of the COVID-19 virus. So when we already have an agreement in 2013 which says that we need to work together to combat natural disasters and infectious diseases, but now what is happening is something that's completely different. So these examples to show that in the past also we have had several agreements, but then they have not led to a peaceful resolution of the border issue, or at least peace across the border. So the bottom line of all these things is that LAC itself is not properly defined or delineated. There is no clarity for both the nations about each other's perception of LAC. So this is the first thing, which this can be the next starting point, like exchanging the maps between the two countries, so as to know what is the other's perception on where the location of LAC is. So this is very important, to be able to first know what the other side is actually presuming, and only then we can start talkings and discussion and negotiation. So exchange of the maps will be the first starting point, is what the author says. So now we go to the next topic, which is the universal basic income. So this article starts by saying that why we need a universal basic income. So it argues by giving the example of Silicon Valley. It says that if you look at Silicon Valley, it has 5 out of the 8 most valuable companies, and they have a cumulative market cap of over $4 trillion, but yet they are employing just 1.2 million people. So, this shows that human capital is not that important as it used to be before. And even when the market valuations are so high, the number of human beings that are getting employed is very less. This is because of improvements in the technology, automation, and all that. So the article argues that even in future this is going to continue, that there will be more automation, there will be more artificial intelligence, machine learning, and less requirement of the human capital. So in which case many people would lose their job, and therefore universal basic income may be. So it says that there'll be two main purposes for at least discussing about the universal basic income, which is one is the job opportunities. So the job opportunities are going to dwindle further in the future. And the second thing is it is also being deliberated as an effective poverty eradication tool. So these are the two reasons why we should at least deliberate upon the utility of universal basic income. So several of the former Nobel laureates like Peter Diamond, Christopher Pissarritz have even tech leaders like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk have been supporters of the universal basic income in the future, because they know that they've been heading tech giants, and they know that because of technology developments in the future, there is going to be loss of a lot of employment. So universal basic income deserves a further studies also. So now what is UBI? As the name itself suggests, it is universal. So it means that it doesn't make any distinction whether somebody is poor or rich, whether somebody is living in a rural area or in the urban area, how much somebody is earning, whether somebody has a job or not. So none of that is material for universal basic income. So it applies to every citizen of the country. Everybody will universally be given this support. So and also the second important thing is that it is unconditional. So no conditions are imposed that if such and such a criteria is fulfilled, only then the income will be given. There is no such condition. So it is an unconditional fixed amount that will be provided to every citizen in the country. So that is universal basic income. So when you come to look at how UBI has been treated across the world, various countries like Kenya, Brazil, Finland, Switzerland, they have also thought about this concept, and they have in fact also started some UBI pilot studies to supplement the income of their population. So this is also being done. And what is the status at present in India? So the first thing is that in India, if you have been through the 1617 economic survey, anybody, you know that economic survey had discussed it at length about the universal basic income. So the 1617 economic survey and even the International Monetary Fund, IMF, had proposed some form of UBI, like quasi basic income schemes in India. So this will not have a universal coverage, rather it will have a coverage of 75% of the population, leaving the rest 25% who are rich and super rich. And it will entail a fiscal cost of nearly 4.9% of the GDP. So this had been proposed, and but however nothing has happened after that. This had been the proposal. So now what has been the progress? The progress was not good. Why? Because it entails a lot of fiscal cost, which was again not thought to be affordable. And second, it gave rise to a debate that if UBI is given, then will the other subsidies will have to be cut. So if UBI has to be afforded, then the other subsidies and welfare support that the government is already providing to the citizens, various subsidies, will have to be cut. So this again was not politically beneficial also. So that is why this idea was not looked into further. So why are we talking about this now? So what is the relevance today? The first thing is that if you look at the global growth in 2020, so the global growth according to IMF in the year 2020 is going to be -3%. So it has also said that this is going to be worse than the Great Depression of 1930s. And India is at least projected to grow at 1.9%, which is a positive growth rate. So if you look at the growth rate itself, it is very easy to predict that there is going to be a lot of job losses, there is going to be a lot of unemployment issues that is going to happen. So when we talk of this, that there will be poor growth in the future because of the COVID crisis and the lockdown and disruption in the global supply chains, there is going to be job losses and unemployment. Secondly is the technology. Technology definitely will continue to make fast developments in the future when it comes to automation, robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, everything. So all of these again is going to lead to job losses. So because of these things, again, this topic has become very relevant now to be discussed, how a form of UBI could be implemented. So this was about the UBI. Now we'll go to the next topic, which is India-Australia relations. So in this, the recent update is that Prime Minister of India and the Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, are going to have a virtual summit in coming on June 4th. So there will be a virtual summit. This is the most recent update. So in this backdrop, we'll be talking about India and Australia relations. So if we look at the context behind this virtual summit on June 4th, so various Australian prime ministers in the recent years, like Julia Gillard, Tony Abbott, Turnbull, and now Mr. Morrison's visit to India. This Morrison's visit to India was also postponed because first there were bushfires in Australia in the month of January, and now it is after that it is getting postponed because of the COVID pandemic. So now that they will be meeting in a virtual summit is definitely a matter of importance. So when we talk of the strategic and defense relationships between the two, so the first thing is how the two countries came together to pass this resolution in the World Health Assembly that there has to be more scrutiny on the origin of the coronavirus. So this again shows how these countries are coming together on international multilateral fora, which matters and which is concerned about countries like China, which India and Australia are looking as a common competitor or enemy. So this is one example of the World Health Assembly. And also, apart from that, when we talk of strategic and defense ties, comes the Indo-Pacific. So both these countries are in the Indo-Pacific and they want to have that maritime security. They want to safeguard the sea lanes of communication. So because of all these things again, and also increasing presence of the Chinese in the Indo-Pacific region, these two countries are now collaborating with each other. Next is they are also the members of the Quad. So Quad comprise of India, Australia, Japan and United States. So this is in a way to counter China's increasing presence in the region. So this again is shows at the strategic presence of these countries in the region. So this again talks of the strategic relation. And then also after the virtual summit, the two countries are expected to sign the mutual logistic support agreement. So this logistic support agreement will basically increase the defense cooperation between the two countries, and also it will help in easing the conduct of joint military exercises between the two countries. So that is the utility of the logistic support agreement. Then we have already conducted the AUSINDEX, which is the bilateral naval exercises between Indian and the Australian naval forces. And now there are also talks to include Australia as a permanent member in the Malabar exercises, which we currently undertake along with Japan. So this is also there. All these shows our strategic and defense related cooperation. And at the same time, there is also a suggestion that the 2+2 dialogues or the format of talks which takes place between India and Africa is currently at the secretary level. So there is a suggestion that this has to be elevated to the foreign and the defense ministry levels. So this again is a suggestion. So all of these point to the strategic and the defense relation between the two countries. So now we talk of the health. So even in the case of health, there have been a lot of collaboration in the past also. And when it comes to the current case related to the COVID, so Australia is also undertaking a lot of effort in this direction. In fact, Australia has been able to keep the level of infection to very low levels. So in this regard, the two of the scientists who have been responsible for this there are also Indian born. So one is Kshitij Kapoor. So Kshitij Kapoor has produced a report on the recovery roadmap to recovery, and also another scientist is S.S. Vasan. So Vasan is also now leading efforts to develop a vaccine for COVID in Australia. So these point to the recent Indian-born scientists who've been contributing related to the COVID efforts in Australia, and this is because of which Australia has been able to keep the infection levels also at low levels. So then if we come to economy and trade, so this Anthony Pratt of Pratt Industries. So Pratt Industries is a very famous industry in Australia. So Anthony Pratt of Pratt Industries, which is one of Australia's richest businessmen, is Pratt. So this businessman is also talking about the direct to consumer and consumer packaged goods. So when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to food processing, and when it comes to these direct to trading to farmers, from farmers to consumers. So in all these, Australia is a global leader. So therefore, definitely India has lessons to learn from Australia in this regard. And as far as setting up these industries and the global supply chains is concerned, Australia is a very good partner for India. Next is related to education. In the field of education also, we have had student exchange programs, and the scholars were studying in the various universities of each other country. So at present, as we just said that the infection rates in Australia are at the lower levels now, so it is more likely that the Australian universities will now open more quickly and more quickly than the European universities. So this will serve as a very good alternative to the Indian students who aim to study abroad. So this is one important aspect. And the second is that if you look at the Australian universities, they are publicly funded, and many of them also rank top in the world. So we have a good lesson to learn from Australia regarding the quality education in these universities, how to improve the rankings, how to improve the quality of education. So that is very important lesson which India can learn from Australia. Similarly, now there was an online course that was conducted on contemporary India. This was given to the Australian students from the University of Melbourne. So this online course again is a good opportunity which the scope can further be expanded, and more online courses can be thought of between the two countries for the benefit of the students. So this is all in the field of education. So we now move to the next topic. Okay, we'll discuss yesterday's question, which was about India and Africa relations. So when we talk of any international relation question, the first thing is to draw the map of both the countries. So that is very important, and to indicate some important strategically important areas and all that, and some important issues also can be highlighted with the help of maps. The second thing is to categorize the relations into different categories. For instance, when we are talking about India Africa, it can be geostrategic. In geostrategic, you will talk about how Africa is very important for India's security, particularly the Horn of Africa region, because that is very close to India. So there is the threat of radicalism, there is piracy that is prevalent on that coast, organized crime, all emerge from this region. So therefore, it shows that we are also collaborating and cooperating each other with respect to piracy and radicalism and all that. So this is with respect to geostrategic. So similarly, you can talk about geopolitical. In geopolitical, you can say African countries have been very supportive of India gaining a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. And Africa is also recognizing of India's soft power capabilities. And also India is one of the largest providers of the in the United Nations peacekeeping missions in Africa. So Indians are serving there. So, and also Africa is the largest beneficiary of India's ITEC programs. So these are important areas in the geopolitical sphere where we are cooperating. Similarly, we can talk about economy and trade. In the field of economy and trade, So in here again, Africa is a good source of energy for us, because in even in India's integrated energy policy, we talk of diversifying our imports or our energy sources across the world. So in which case, Africa is a very good example for gold, diamond, petroleum, natural gas. All these imports, these energy sources are very much prevalent in Africa. So that is why that cooperation is also there. And similarly, even when it comes to agriculture, agribusiness, so here again, India can contribute to the food security of Africa and also itself. So India is looking at leasing land in Africa, so that it can overcome the land deficit that is there in India also. So this will help in food security of Africa also. And also, when we further talk of economy, you can talk that you can say that India has provided free access to the market. So free market access has been provided to exports of nearly more than 30 least developed African countries. For that, we are providing free market access, so duty free. That is very important. And you can definitely talk about the trade that we have with Africa, which I told is nearly $63 billion. So that is also an important thing. So all of these, when it comes to economy, you can talk about all that. Also, if you want to include something unique also, you can say how some of these state governments in India are also creating their own independent relationship with the African countries. For example, Kerala is planning to import cashew from African countries, because many of the processing plants in Kerala, they are running low on the raw material. So by importing cashew, they will be able to achieve optimum capacity utilization in their processing plants. So this is one thing. And countries like South Africa, they are working with the Kudumbashree, which is the self-help group in Kerala. So that is the aim of that is to eradicate poverty and also women empowerment. So this also, South Africa is collaborating with Kudumbashree. So these are some of the unique things that are happening. Apart from that, if you talk in terms of health and education, we have the Pan Africa e-network. So in Pan Africa e-network also, we have more than 48 countries of Africa who have now uh, they are a part of this network now. So through this, various healthcare services are provided. Their healthcare personnel are being trained by the Indian healthcare personnel virtually. And yesterday itself, Friday, we discussed how more than 50,000 scholarship are being provided by India to the African students who come to study in India. So all of these in terms of health and education. So like that, you can make categories and explain. And whenever the role is asked, or the India Africa relations is asked, apart from writing the relations, we must also mention some issues also which are present between the two countries. The first issue that is often pointed out is that China's overwhelming presence in Africa and the way it is aggressively investing in Africa. So we will not be able to match that checkbook diplomacy of China. So that is one issue, that Chinese presence is increasing in the region. And the second is that several of our developmental aids that we give, we are giving to multilateral institutions and we rely on them like the African Union. We are not giving it to the particular countries by taking their consent, by asking for their cooperation. So that is not happening. So we have to get in touch more with these individual countries, and the kind of assistance that we are trying to provide is relevant for the issues in these countries. So these countries will have to be made partners when we are giving them any developmental aid. This is another issue. Third, when we're talking about African students, so the racial discrimination that they have faced in several past instances in India, so that again has been a bone of contention, and that has also led to spoiling of our relationships with each other. And also, there are also the issue of bureaucratic hurdle in the trade expansion between the two countries, because of the same reason that we interact mostly with the African Union rather than with the individual countries. And you can conclude your answer by talking about the India Africa Forum Summit, which is happening since 2015 and is a regular exercise through which our issues and everything is discussed. And similarly, how we are now providing assistance through medical supplies during the time of COVID, and how in the past also HIV, AIDS medicines, Ebola, etc., we have contributed a lot. So we are basically helping in developing, and also through education. African countries again have a youthful demography. So by providing them scholarships in education, by virtually connecting to them, we are able to improve that, harness that demography for African countries. And at the same time, you can conclude with the Afro-Asian solidarity, or the NAM ideology, which still persists, and how we can carry that forward. So today's question is, analyze the pros and cons of a universal basic income. It's a 10-marker question for 150 words. So for today, we have completed 2 months of the ICANN initiative. Shortly, we'll again put the list of the topics that we have covered in the second month. So go through the PDF and see the list of topics. We have covered a lot of topics, in fact, and if you revise that properly, and if you can implement that in the exam, if you can recollect that in the exam through multiple revisions, you will definitely excel in your exams, and that's I'm really confident about that. So thank you very much. Bye bye.